Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. The African Meeting House Investigation Procurement Work Group meeting is now in order. Just to remind everyone that the meeting is visually and audio recorded. We have 2 minutes to look at the first one from our first meeting of April 17th. I have some comments. Does anyone have any comments? And then I'll give you mine.
I know we said, we talked about the, scope and I guess what the Board of Selectmen decided to do versus what the original article did, but
That's what's wrong with these minutes.
yeah, it says we agreed, but we didn't agree to them. We just agreed to go forward to continue
Well,
to more.
The way I would word this,
Yeah.
because what you'd present was actually probably an early draft. If you go back to the actual town warrant, which is actually attached to the minutes. Article 36. And Article 36, the recommendation was moved not to adopt the article. And then there was a positive motion made that that essentially was a reworking of that motion wording, but still the same thing. The document you showed us had people's names in it, so those names never got into the warrant. Right, so the way I would word this, and I'll read it to you and then appreciate some input. Motion was made to consider the early draft of the 2024 town meeting Article 6. But it was clarified that the select board has charged its committee with selecting an investigator, then take out this rather than following the original, because that's not what the select board did. As outlined in the approved positive motion made for Article 36 at the 2024 ATM. Because that's exactly what happened. So the select board didn't change anything. The select board is essentially following the motion that was approved at the 24 meeting, which was the positive motion of Article 26 or 36.
Yeah, I don't know how you change an article, where you just change the motion, you don't change.
No, we
the
didn't
article.
change the article. The article was essentially moved not to be approved. Therefore, you can make a positive motion and then we voted on the positive motion. That's the way this ATM works.
Okay, so there's, I guess on this page right here, there's 236s, so this is what Gail Holgate's motion was, but I think Gail said that wasn't her motion, she didn't write that, so I don't know where that got morphed from. So are you trying to say we should go with this original article here?
No, we have to legally go with the positive motion of Article 36.
Which is this
right here.
second one?
Yep.
Yes, which was the one that was approved by town meeting. By like 300 to 100 votes, something like that.
Mhm.
I mean, that's legally what we have to do. That is the legal motion. The town voted to approve the positive motion of Article 36, and the select board is just following the mandate of Article 36, the positive motion. So select board didn't change anything. That's the sequence.
So then who, I guess, I'm better prepared. So I guess Gail was confused because she was wondering how they went from this article to this article. That was done at town meeting? This
Yes,
whole
it
thing
was.
It was all rewritten
Yes,
by the
No,
lawyer or?
no, so the article up top,
Yeah.
the article that was in the warrant with the FinCom motion, as you
Okay.
recall, when you were on the FinCom, they made motions, those went in the warrant.
Absolutely,
The FinCom motion was not to adopt the article.
right,
Okay, then Gail, probably with the assistance of town council, wrote a positive motion for consideration at the town meeting. And that was what was presented. That motion was adopted on this page, I think, 387 to 115.
Good.
So this is the positive motion that allocated the money for the article and led us to today. Okay, does that make
Yeah.
sense? So it would have had to have been, the only way that, I mean, typically, if people want to make positive motions, and I'm sorry to interject, Malcolm.
No,
but
please go right ahead.
Typically
We're very informal. You don't have to keep asking me to speak.
Okay.
Just,
Sorry, typically when either for or against motion is made at town meeting, it's done in consultation with council and then discussed with Sarah, and then the positive motion is made at the town meeting and read or put up on the screen
Right, see-
in town meeting, and that would have been what was put up on the screen for the town to vote.
All right,
and that
Okay.
positive motion is actually almost the same wording of the longer motion, but condensed into the fact that the select board was asked to find an investigator to investigate the investigation, which is essentially what it is. So this, I'll read what I wrote again, and if this sounds correct. Because it says a motion was considered an early draft of the 2024 town meeting. But it's clarified that the select board has charged the committee with selecting an investigator as outlined in the approved positive motion of Article 36 of the 2024 annual town meeting. That's essentially what's happened. That seem comfortable with everyone? Those words?
right. So then, but when it gets to the scope of work, then is that not added to? Because the scope of work seems to be narrowed down to the police files and things
No,
like
this,
that.
we write the scope of work, and that's what we did, on that first meeting, we kind of outlined that.
Mhm.
So the scope of work is up to this committee.
Mhm.
All we're charged with is finding an investigator to investigate how the investigation went. That's essentially our mandate. And so the scope of work, how we define that scope of work is totally up to us.
Okay,
Within, obviously with the legalities of an investigation.
and should that, I guess it's like came first, the chicken or the egg. So again, I don't know what an investigator would do. I'm not sure his process, so that's what I'm kind of lost.
Well,
I'm
that's
a
what-
novice. So my point is, when I read that, it says we're gonna investigate town administration, the board of selectmen, the police department, the DA. A scope of work we kind of started was just kind of the police department's files, so it almost seems like that has to be put on top of that,
Well, that's within our work. We'll define
Okay.
that. And if you remember in the scope of work that we worked out on the first meeting to a degree and talked about last time, we had in the scope of work, there's like, what, 15 points. 14 points.
7.
7 plus 2.
Yeah. plus two.
Seven
Okay.
plus 2,
Alright.
okay?
Alright.
And so could I have a motion to approve the minutes with the edits that I had read into the record?
I make the motion to approve the minutes with the edits made on the record.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Rocky. Oh,
Excuse me, you have to do roll call vote because Dr. Trent is.
yeah, I will.
Thank
Absolutely,
you.
I know that.
Okay.
Okay, so. Motion to approve the minutes as edited. Dr. Trent,
Yes,
Mr. Fox.
Yes.
Mr. Williams.
Yes.
And Luke.
Yes.
Chairman says aye. Next minutes. April 23rd. I have a couple comments. Does anybody on the committee have a comment? I would, just me, when you mentioned, Brian, I wish you'd use his formal name
Okay,
in that, Brian, in the minutes.
thank you.
And the other minor thing is in call to order, we really don't have to vote on a call to order. The chairman can call to order.
It doesn't have to be that.
You don't have to have all those ayes. Are there any other comments? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes with the edits as stated by the chair?
Motion approved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
second by Mr. Fox, all in favor, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Mr. Fox.
Aye.
Dr. Trent,
Hi,
and the chairman says aye, the minutes are approved. Okay, let's go into business. Oh, okay. I will use this name Brian since we're foreign.
Thank you. So I think both, our deputy procurement officer, Cindy Sue and myself are probably gonna work together on this, Mr. Chair, but we did send, I do have a copy of what you had sent to, what Maureen, that you had sent to Maureen. She forwarded to us. I've looked at it. I have not had a chance to talk to Cindy about how much she has looked at it, but, I'll give you my observations and some suggestions, and then we can work from there, and
Good.
Cindy can chime in any point.
Just let me get my,
If that's
Copy.
okay with you, Mr. Chair.
that's fine. If I just-
The scope to me, if this is what had been agreed to by the committee, looks actually pretty well written. I know it was, I think it was the one previous. If you want to add to it, I think there's room to add to it, but as far as a scope, setting out what is the expectation of whomever the group selects, I think it's pretty self-explanatory what your expectations are. Again, if you think that there's more, Cliff, you may have some suggestions. It sounds like, at least from the discussion with the minutes, but if you want to add to this, in terms of additional work that you think needs to be done, we can certainly add those bullet points in there. And this is a good basis, to begin for the scope of work portion of the RFP. Mr. Chair, with the email had criteria, I'm just gonna read these and kind of give you how I think these would align, and then take you through the evaluative piece of an RFP. So you must show adequate experience in similar law enforcement investigations, and then we had talked in the meeting about relationship to Nantucket. Firm must disclose any contacts or ties personally and professionally to Nantucket officials and or district attorney. In parentheses, it says judgment call by the work group. So typically with an RFP, when we have a scope of work, we then define a set of evaluative criteria that we evaluate that on, and we rank it based on highly advantageous, not advantageous, and unacceptable. And typically, any proposal that receives an unacceptable is automatically disqualified. Okay. The first one with must show adequate experience in similar law enforcement investigations, I think is really pretty easy, and I have a kind of some notes on how I would turn that into an evaluative criteria component to
Okay.
measure against the scope, okay? The second one, I thought long and hard from Thursday until tonight, and I don't know how we turn that one into an evaluative criteria, because it just becomes very difficult, okay? In terms of how we would do that. In an RFP, we have what's known as minimum criteria. And in order to advance to the evaluative process or stage, the minimum criteria have to be met. Now, an example is sometimes we say that a firm must have been in business for a minimum of 10 years. Okay, just globally, and not necessarily focused on this, but it has to have been around and operating for a minimum of 10 years. There's also a tax compliance form and a non-conclusion, which are also minimum. Those are statutory minimum requirements. I personally, my recommendation, after thinking about this, that this should be made a minimum criteria. Given, I think, what the committee's what they're looking for in terms of this, and I think that we would ask in the beginning of the document for a disclosure for any relationships or contacts or ties professionally to Nantucket officials and or the district attorney, or have done any work. And I think that would, with a minimum criteria, if the answer was yes, I think we would just be a disqualifying criteria from continuing, I think, which would remove any issues and make it a little easier to move proposals forward to evaluate, because I do believe that this is going to be a difficult one to create a criteria that really everybody on the group can evaluate in a really fair format, or with an open mind, I guess. And I think that if it's a minimum criteria and a firm, that submits, has done work for the town or has done work for the DA's office, then to me, then we would just reject it. And we wouldn't evaluate it.
And that will make it,
And that'll make it clean,
Clean.
it'll make it, it'll be not, everybody will know upfront that that's a criteria, it's a minimum criteria that they can't have done work. You know, in this type of scenario for the town or for the DA's office, and if they, and we maybe the narrowest scope should just be the town. But we could consider whether we want to extend it to the DA's office, but I think that's the easiest way to go for that one.
comments on Brian's suggestion?
I do.
Well, that's public comment.
I don't wanna limit the criteria too much, because then you end up.
We're not, I've
only
got
having-
4 or 5 more written.
Yeah,
to
but
give
like,
to you.
yeah, you only have like
Okay.
3 people in the world
Yeah.
that can be on to do it, so, yeah, so, the 10 years seems. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe 5, but, anyway. Yeah, I know we have to have a criteria, just don't wanna.
So maybe
wipe out
what
everybody.
might be good before, if we put that in like the parking lot, I can take you through the criteria that we typically kind of use for these to evaluate them. I'll read them and
Okay,
give you an idea of how the highly advantageous, and so
That'd
on
be fine.
works, which would be helpful. So
Right ahead.
typically, the first evaluative criteria that we always do is, describe your approach to the scope of work. Okay, which is basically take us through how you're gonna do this, how you're gonna perform this body of work that we're asking you to do. And we typically, and Cindy, jump in anytime, because you work on these, you're in these every day, I'm not in these except for reviewing them periodically. But typically what we would do there is, highly advantageous would be written proposal outlines a thoroughly detailed plan based on the scope of work, and it articulates a thorough understanding of the requirements of the scope of work, okay? Advantageous would be written proposal documents an understanding of the scope of work, something to that nature. Advantageous, not advantageous would be something along the lines of written proposal articulates a minimal understanding of this, and then not acceptable would be proposal does not hit or understand the requirements of the scope at all, okay? It's typically what we do in something like this to start with. Then we would also do, so this goes to your point, Cliff, about experience with similar type of law enforcement investigations. Now, I'm just throwing out numbers. The committee can change this, okay? But highly advantageous could be something like has completed 6 or more similar type investigations to what's requested in the scope of work. Advantageous, which is the next one, would be has completed more than 4 but less than 6 similar type investigatory review work. Not advantageous has completed, more than 2, and then not acceptable or unacceptable would be has not completed any. And the reason that we put has not completed any, because the committee would be surprised, but you get firms that will pull it off the line, online, download it, look at it and submit something, and they've never done the work before at all. They're just throwing it against the wall and seeing if it will stick.
Right.
Okay. And then we could have something, one, I think in this, which I think would be good for the committee, would be describe the experience of the staff in your firm. Okay, and highly advantageous could be firm has more than four employees with investigatory backgrounds or something of that nature. Advantageous could be more than 2, but less than 4. Not advantageous could be less than 2, but more than, would be 1, and then not acceptable would
So
be
you
has none.
grade.
So you're grading them. That's how you're doing this, okay?
Yeah, that's because I was worried that.
Yeah.
We wouldn't find anybody.
No, so this is
This
what we,
way we.
Yep.
So if somebody will really stand out.
so, right. And then, so the last one, which I think might be one of the more critical ones to the group as a whole, is we always ask for a list of references, but I think in this possible criteria, now, granted, you can go in any direction you want, but this is kind of what I was thinking if I was developing this on my own to do this, is the list of references and a sample of a report, because I think if I remember, there's expectation that there's gonna be a report written,
Oh, yeah.
right? Okay. So then, highly advantageous could be something along the lines of references and sample report show a high degree of competence and ability to execute the scope as provided. And then we just kind of ratably go down from there in terms of that, how we do it. And then I think we can modify these however you want, but I think those 4 evaluative criteria with the highly advantageous in that, I think will get you to what the committee is looking for and ultimately should produce a result with a firm that I think
We'll do
you
the
would
job.
be comfortable, the committee could be comfortable recommending to do the work. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get my head around this whole thing, because it is kind of abstract compared to,
Sure.
let's say, a building or a road or something like that.
It is.
And when I think back on my mom 2 years ago, who suddenly we had to put in a nursing home. My family had the choice of searching around on our own, as not knowing anything about nursing homes in particular, but knowing that we could pull them out of the phone book and know that there's one here and one there. And we could probably have like found, chosen a place and stuck her in there, right? But instead, what we did was we found an agent who actually was an expert in the field. And what we don't have at this table right now is an expert in the field. We're all sort of, in terms of this particular, what we're, where our approach is to end up with an end result of expertise. But like my mother's situation, we found an expert who knew all the inside tracks. She knew everything about all the nursing homes that had gone wrong. She knew how they cheat, how they treat people good, how they treat people bad, what their track records are, all this kind of thing. And the thing that sort of worries me right now, I'm not disagreeing with anything you've said so far, is that we don't have a really deep inside avenue into where I think we need to go. And I think Cliff keeps pointing at, some original people that I think and also because you, Brian, said that there may be aspects where we could actually tap into other people to help us, make decisions and whatnot. My thought is, what if, and I'm looking at, these people that were experts, Cliff had some people identified already who were experts that they thought might be the experts to like do our job, right? What if we use them as consultants to come and talk to us and sort of give us more of an insight into into an insight that we couldn't possibly know, but they would, because they're insiders. That would give us a greater depth of wherewithal to basically build a global manner to approach this.
So,
But then we would almost have to have an RFP a
well,
consultant.
there is one other potential issue with that is typically the Inspector General has held the position that if you hire a consultant to help you develop the scope and do all of that work, or you employ a consultant, then they're precluded from participating in the ultimate RFP that goes out. So if we use somebody that somebody knows that has done some of this work to kind of guide us in developing the scope and they would not be able to participate in anything other than helping us do that. They could not then turn around and bid on the work, because they would have had essentially inside knowledge and an inside track on the ability in their proposal. So we're trying to balance both of them, because I don't necessarily disagree, because I'll be the first to admit I've never written an RFP for this type of work ever in my life. So we're trying to figure out how to do this in a way that will get as many firms to submit proposals and make it in a way that has criteria that I think is you're able to look at as a group and be able to look at the proposals and come to conclusions based on that. Does that make sense?
I appreciate that the comments, but my concern is we almost have to interview these people before we would.
Well, then
You almost get an RFP to find out the people, because what are their biases? Some of them have been very vocal about the whole process, so I'm not sure. They would be.
Well, just to refer to what he said, like, so there was the investigator, which was Charlie Perry, which was part of the original board, and I think he said we could have him or Bob or whoever come in and actually consult or just be involved. So I guess it gets back to the point who's trying to make is when you're coming up with the criteria, and like you said, you've never done this for this type of thing. I just try to think of all ranges, like a private investigator. Maybe there's only one guy in this firm. Like you said, you have to have four. Okay, just what? I don't know in that business, do they usually have four? Do they have five? Do they have one? Does
Yeah,
a
I don't-
guy have,
I
you know what I'm saying? So that's why I say a guy like Charlie Perry or someone like him that was a sergeant, or he was he was in the police force, they just have a better knowledge of what happens in that field.
But see, my
See my point?
problem is I don't know him.
Oh,
I would have to interview him. I would
Okay.
have to see if he's capable of it. And then we might as well put an RFP for a consultant to have an RFP.
The other thing though, too,
I
to
don't
think
think
about
so.
though, too, Cliff, is that. Like, say, it doesn't matter who it is, it could be a one-person firm can submit.
right,
And just because you get an advantageous or something, as long as you don't get an unacceptable or not acceptable,
You can,
does not mean that you could be, doesn't mean you're precluded from being the firm that's the highest rated proposal overall, because you have to remember, the way this process works is that every single individual on the group rates for purpose of the discussion, the 4 criteria. And then you rate the proposal overall, and then you discuss it, everybody discusses their rankings. And you come to a group ranking on what is the most advantageous proposal, and that's not always the highest ranked proposal. It's after it comes out of the committee discussion. It could be somebody that has only, you could have 3 firms have all highly advantageous, and you have one firm that has 3 highly advantageous and an advantageous, but that advantageous may be what's most critical to you.
Right.
And you think that they're gonna do a better job, and you can still, that's why the RFP is the best way to do this, because it gives you that flexibility.
I agree, I was just trying to make a point,
Yeah,
that
no,
I didn't even know where to start, whether it's one guy, 5 guys, 10 years, 4
Yeah,
we'll
years.
see.
So-
I'd like to think, excuse me,
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to think that with all this information we have here, all this information we have here, and what we have with Cindy, that between us, this committee, that we can make an intelligent decision on what we need to have done between us all, without having an FBI background, without being the chief of police in Hyannis. I think with what he has here, what we have here, and what we have here, we should be able to get the job done without having to bring in other people and extending the process even more.
I said, go on. Dr. Trent, will you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Rocky. I understand the idea of bringing in a consultant, but to me, for the spirit of transparency and clarity, because quite frankly, we all don't want to have this process have to be redone again. That if we want to bring in a consultant as a committee, then we need to do an RFP for the consultant, interview the consultants, and do that process so that everybody feels that they've had an opportunity to participate in that, and then go to this next process. So I mean, it's the difference of time, but it's also the difference of how we want to do it. But I don't think that we can just say, because we're familiar with person X or person Y, they can come in as a consultant. If the consultant option is the option we want to do, then we need to be open and unbiased in our vetting of those individuals and make that decision, and then move to this next step. So it's just about, it's really for us to think about what do we want to do and what is in the best interest of the time that we have to do this.
And the other thing, Mr. Chair, that I would highly suggest as we make part of this is interviews. Of,
Absolutely.
depending on how many firms, but if there's only 3 or 4 firms and you could interview every one of them, if we get a lot of them, then we could put in this, that we'll interview up to the 3 highest ranked firms or something like that. But I think that should be that would be an important
I think it's
component
key.
for the group as a whole in the selection process.
I think I agree with my other 2 colleagues, and I don't plan to run again, and I would like very much to have this completed before I leave the select board. So I think if we had a consultant, we'd spend months finding a consultant and months finding, no, I think.
I want to bring a process to you that works and give you criteria that will hopefully help fulfill the charge so that we can get the process underway and going.
I think this is the best way.
So.
This is actually in some ways a slow way, but it is an open way. And as Rocky said, I think we have a pretty good committee of people that will come to the right decision. We'll probably disagree, but we'll come to some kind of consensus on the best firm.
So you're gonna give us a,
We're gonna write this all up and
Okay.
kind of give you, and then you can
Right.
mull it over.
Right.
I think what we'll do probably, and I know it's in the minutes, we briefly talked about advertising. I think we'll just probably put this in police journals around New England and everything too, trying or those types of journals too, to see if they, and, you know, there's a bunch of listservs that we can do that too as well. As well as and we'll probably put this in like the Globe or something so that it reaches farther than
Oh,
it
yeah.
is. Because we have to put it in the INM, but we'll probably do the Globe as well to get farther reach.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you, put that in those places, that's not towards our $60,000, is it, for advertising? No, don't worry about it. Okay, you take care of that? Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay, go on, sir. What else we have?
No, that's everything I have. And Cindy, do you have anything as the deputy procurement officer as well? Since you do this all the time?
Thank you. One thing I would say, with the discussion as to the, scope is that I do have resources as well to reach out to see if anybody else has done anything similar to this, which may help build that scope as well. Because if somebody else has done a similar RFP, then we can always use the material that they've used, and use that to help build our scope as well. So I'll look into resources that are available for that in case anybody has done that before.
Good. So committee questions.
Brian, will you
So-
let us know when the announcements go live? So when you
Yeah,
decide,
so,
Okay.
yeah, that's a great question, Dr. Trent. And what will happen is, after we get this into the format that we put out for everything, it'll go to this committee to review and make, red line suggestions, changes that you would like to see, and that will probably happen at least once. And then in that document, we'll have the date that it'll be released to the public. And it'll have all the steps of the dates. Typically with an RFP, when we put it out, we give, typically we've done them on a 30-day basis. I would say probably maybe 45 days on this one, because what we typically do is we also include a period of time for anybody interested to ask any questions after they've read the document. To ask any clarifying questions that they have, which then we would, probably need to figure out how to develop the responses to, and then distribute an addenda to everybody to answer those questions, because when one firm asks a question in an RFP, every firm gets the question and the answer. It's not just, XYZ firm doesn't ask a question and they only get the answer. Every firm that's downloaded it gets the addenda with the question and the town's response to
It's a
it.
very, very open
Yeah,
process.
yes, it is. But yes, you will see all of that information in the subsequent documents, so you'll know when everything is gonna be online. You'll know in that document, we also list all the key dates, which is including posting the advertisements wherever we end up deciding on posting all of that information.
So what your timeline to get this back to us?
Cindy, do you think we can have this not have necessarily all of the front end work done, because we can be doing this simultaneously? But do you think we can have this, I'll send you this tomorrow morning, the criteria, and you have the scope. Can we have this for them to begin to review at next Monday's meeting?
Yes, I do believe we
Okay.
can.
Yeah.
You guys are
So-
good.
No, so there's more work than just this that we have to do. We have to put the front end of this file together, which is a description and narrative about the town and the rule for award and all of this piece, but we can be working on that. That's standard. That doesn't change no matter what we're doing for a procurement, other than a few sentences about what the procurement is. So we'll get this first to you so that you can be reviewing this, deciding, and then we'll be working on the front end portion of the file and building that so that we can just go in and edit this and try to save some time.
So that Monday's primary meeting next week will be
Yeah,
our
we're
redlining.
redlining and changing of the doc, of the,
And we'll have it right in
of the
front
scope
us,
and the criteria.
and we can
Yes,
scribble
Yep.
all we want.
yes.
And I just want to interject that should annual town meeting go
To Monday.
to Monday, there would be no meeting. There would be no meeting for us.
Wow.
Because
I think you probably, well, my suggestion might be to schedule a meeting for a different day next week,
Could
because
we
I,
post, can we, is it possible just to go the following Monday?
It's already, I
Oh,
have
we're
that,
already on Mondays.
right,
Well, we cannot have a meeting next Monday. I don't like doing that, but
Why don't we just shoot for it? If it doesn't
Yeah.
happen, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
absolutely,
Okay.
we'll shoot
absolutely.
for it.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
won't know until Saturday. Okay.
and then if not, then you'll have an extra week to kind of.
Well, that means when we're at town meeting, we don't speak too much.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Use a sports analogy, a baseball sports analogy. So what inning are we in right now?
Fourth.
Okay, wow. I'm happy with that.
And I think the scope that you, and other than if there's possible changes, I think the scope is good and. You know, once I think everybody sees this like written word on the paper with all of the criteria, then I think you can move along pretty quickly and. And kind of develop that. I think that, so I think the rest of the process will move along pretty quick.
If if we do meet next Monday, I may be on Zoom, but we'll manage. We'll manage. All right, any other questions? All right,
Is there any, I guess I would have this question, maybe a consensus of the group, is there any minimum criteria that you want? That you collectively think the firm should have? No, I know I said 10 years, but I'm just saying, we typically do something like that, must have been in business for a minimum of 3 years or something. Cause I don't think you want a firm that's just started, this is like their first year of business, I'm just,
10 seems a long. time.
Yeah.
no, I know.
Yeah.
I say 10 because we do that with engineering firms for the big projects, and that's why. we
Yeah,
want
it almost seems like these guys are law enforcement and they retire and then they
Yeah.
go into the business,
Yeah.
so it's not like it's
So
their first
maybe-
day.
Yeah,
So
I
let's-
almost feel like we need to say something like in business for X years and law enforcement experience a minimum of Y years.
Okay.
Does that make sense? That way,
It does.
just like Cliff says, if they retired last year and they've only been in business for 3, but they've got 30 years worth of law enforcement experience, that to me is a competitive application.
So we don't have to decide that tonight, but just think about that, because the minimum criteria is really in the front end that we typically build for everything, and we can just
Right.
insert that.
No, I
But
like
just keep that in your mind, just as something that we
to be a
want.
balance
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Their before retired years.
I mean, the goal is obviously to get as many proposals to evaluation. We don't make the minimum criteria so difficult, no one can do
Yeah.
them. But we also want to make sure that we're
Okay,
getting firms that are capable or have, you know, in this case, also not any conflicts.
so again, and we thank you,
Oh,
department, for all this.
Yeah.
Any concerns or comments from the committee?
That's it.
I'm hearing none. Any public comment? Any public comment?
Yeah, just a little, for criteria for these firms, 5-year increments is great. To whatever, 25 plus is top limit, you know? I would prefer they were not in or from New England or anywhere north of New York. So, well, just to keep it completely out of the circle, because New England's law enforcement are tight knit. So whoever we have should be from nowhere near here. And that person would then have no affiliation with Nantucket in any way.
But that'd have to be a pretty minimum criteria. We may not get anybody.
No, because there are people in the Midwest that definitely have that qualification. There's people on the West Coast that have the qualification, but I think that any law enforcement or investigator that's in New England is gonna have some influence or connection to Massachusetts for sure.
Good point.
Okay, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a good point.
Okay.
Any other public comment? Okay, next meeting is next Monday. Hopefully, it'll be next Monday. If not, we'll manage it. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Mr. Fox?
Aye.
Mr. Williams?
Aye.
Luke?
Aye.
Dr. Trent?
Hi.
And the chairman says aye. We'll see you next Monday.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Have a good one, everyone.
Monday, that means the town meeting is gone in one day, which would be really great.
I like the fact that we're in inning 4. I thought we were moving too slowly, but that's. not
No,
bad.
you're
Yeah.
further along than you think. It's just.
That was good to hear. I was thinking bottom of the second you were gonna say.
No.